Good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Blanco. I'm part of the Communication on Progress team at the Global Compact Office, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our webinar on the Communication on Engagement Policy. This webinar has been designed exclusively for representatives of local networks and for Global Compact staff. If you happen to be a company and a business participant not related to a local network, we encourage you to join one of our webinars that have been specially designed for you. Over this webinar, we are going to learn more about the Communication on Engagement Policy. We're going to explain what it is, and this is a policy that will only affect non-business participants. A few rules of the webinar. Those of you who have joined us in the past for webinars, you know the rules already. We have a bunch of participants today, so for that reason, everyone is going to be muted. So if you speak to me, I will not be able to hear you. However, all your questions are welcome, and please type them at any time in the little box that appears in your screen. It's a box that says questions. You can just type the questions in there, and I will be taking questions as they come in. So even though you cannot speak to me, please at any moment feel free to post your questions there. The webinar will last about 45 minutes. Can be 1 hour maximum depending on the questions that you might have. At the end of the webinar, you will be receiving the materials, you will receive the presentation, and you will also receive the recording of the webinar. So we will be sending that to you. So without further ado, let me see, I think I have my colleague Gordana with me. Gordana, are you there? Okay.
Hi, Anna. Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay, great, perfect. Thank you very much. So my colleague Gordana is with me. She will be actually handling the questions. So please feel free again to post your questions there. So without further ado, as I was saying, let's get started on our webinar for today. We're going to go over 4 steps today. We're going to learn what are today's objectives. After that, we're going to learn about the COE policy origins and its objectives. We are going to go over the draft of the policy, and we're going to see what are the next steps to follow in this process. So today's objectives. First of all, we want all local networks to be able to clearly understand the origins and the objectives of the Communication on Engagement Policy. We want local networks to get familiarized with the text of the COE, what it is, what exactly it entails. We want local networks to understand how the implementation of the COE will affect non-business participants, and equip local network representatives and their staff to support non-business participants in communicating with the Global Compact. So after this policy is released, it will be released in October. We will talk more about that, the release process, etc. later. When it is released in October, we envision that a lot of these non-business participants that now will be required to report, they will be counting on the local networks for support. So we want to make sure that all of you are in a position to support them. So let's see exactly what this is all about and how you could address the questions by the participants. Let's see what were the origins of this policy and what are their objectives. Why did it come about? Why, how we came up with this. So in this slide, as you see, is a timeline. And first of all, what the timeline shows us is that it has been a lengthy process. If you see here, the first date, the first date here is December of 2011. So this whole process of the requirement for non-business participants started in 2011. During that year, a number of local networks, this is actually an initiative that came out from local networks. So in 2011, local networks were expressing concerns about non-business participation in the Global Compact. What they kept telling us that their concerns were in three areas. First of all, they said our non-business participants, when they join the initiative, we don't have enough information about them. We don't collect enough data. In many cases, we don't really know who they are, what exactly they do. The amount of information collected from them is insufficient. So that was the first concern raised by local networks that year. Second, local networks kept telling us during that year, they were saying once a non-business participant joins the Global Compact, there are not really clear expectations from them. We don't have a clear list, a clear document where it explains what exactly we expect from non-business participants. So that was the second concern that local networks raised. Thirdly, local networks said, look, non-business participants join. We don't know, we don't have enough information about who they are. Then they join, there are no clear expectations from them. And not only that, but then they join and they don't have to do anything. They don't have to report like companies do. They basically can just be there as free riders in a way. They can say to the world that they are participants in the Global Compact. They can use that, but they are not required to report or to show in some way what level of engagement they have. And this third problem that the local networks raised was creating another problem, and was that some organizations realized that non-business participants do not have a requirement of reporting. So some organizations that, if you look carefully, they could very well be businesses, they were signing up as non-businesses in such a way that they can still say, I'm a Global Compact participant, and yet they didn't have to report because they signed up as non-business participants. So these were the three main concerns that local networks raised throughout that first year in 2011. Actually before that, but in 2011, the concerns were loud and clear. So the Global Compact Office collected that feedback from local networks, and we took a proposal to the board. In the meeting, the board meeting in December 2011, we told the board members, look, this is what's going on. Local networks find this very worrisome situation. We agree with them. What can we do in this case? The board in December 2011 mandated that we, the Global Compact Office, developed a new policy for non-business participants. And that's how we started. In January, we opened consultations. The consultation was done, of course, among local networks. That year, 2012, was the year when local networks were consulted, as well as some groups of non-business participants. So we collected all this information in order to be able to create a draft of the policy. We took the policy, the draft of that initial policy, to the next board meeting in June 2012, and the board reviewed. At that moment, there was a very interesting debate that emerged at the board level. There were two different positions. One of them, they were saying, okay, what exactly are we requiring the non-business participants to report on? Because the policy, of course, included a reporting component. So the draft said non-business participants are now required to report. then it describes what exactly they are supposed to report on. That's the policy, as we will see in a minute. But the board members were saying, okay, what exactly do we want them to report on? One group of people said, we want them to report exactly as companies do. We want them to report on their integration and implementation of the 10 principles. That's what companies do, therefore that's what non-business participants should do. That was one position. The other position at the board level was, no, no, no. We don't want them to report on that. We expect non-business participants, of course, to incorporate and implement the 10 principles. But the whole reason of their participation in our initiative is to support the mission of the Global Compact and to make sure that businesses are the ones adopting sustainable practices. So this debate in that board meeting in June went on and on and on until time was running out, and the board decided unanimously to postpone the debate. They mandated us, the Global Compact Office, with the task of collecting more information, do some more research to continue the debate, and to postpone the decision until the next board meeting. So after that meeting in June, we opened consultations again with some groups of non-business participants, some stakeholders. Through our board members, we have access to these groups, etc. Consultations were open again, and we continued with the drafting of the policy, and then we submitted a second draft for the board in December 2012. The board in that meeting, continuing with the previous discussion, they finally agreed on the second position that I just described. We, the Global Compact, we are initiative mainly for business participants. Our main goal is to engage business participants. We do accept the participation of non-business participants as a crucial stakeholder, but the role of this group is to support the mission and the vision of the Global Compact. Therefore, they are required to report on how they have been engaging with the Global Compact and how they have been supporting the Global Compact in our goals. That was the board's decision. And in the last part, that was in December 2012 when the board reached that conclusion. And the first part of this year, from January to May, we have been finalizing the draft, another round of consultations, because so many months have been gone by that we just wanted to double check and confirm with different stakeholders that the requirements in the policy were still valid. So that's how we came with the final draft of the policy. Now, as you can see, it has been a very active couple of years from December 2011. During this time, many local networks came to us asking, what are you guys doing? We talked about this years ago and nothing is going on. Of course, from your end of the story, you were probably perceiving nothing was going on, but now you have a clear picture of how busy of a time it has been with this topic here in our office. We have been constantly discussing and moving forward since December of 2011. Now, in the final draft of the policy, we are still calling it draft. It doesn't mean that it's not finalized. It is final. It is not open for any more comments. Consultations were done and closed. It is done. We are calling it final draft because it has not been officially released. And we have to do that in order to call it a policy. So for now, it is still being called a draft. Again, it is not open for any more discussion at this point. So this is an overview of what the consultation process was about. As you all know, for us, for our office, the consultation processes are the most important ones because we don't just come up with the policy. Policies are always based on feedback and on the opinions of our stakeholders. So for local networks, of course, we already know, as I explained, this initiative came out from the local network input into this. So they are basically one of the main authors of this whole thing. And then in the consultation process, after being the authors, then in the consultation, they were consulted, you guys were consulted on the draft, the text of the policy. You were consulted on a questionnaire that we designed. Remember, I explained before, one of the main concerns by local networks was how little information we are collecting from this group. So we designed a new joining questionnaire, and as you remember, some of you might remember, you were consulted on that questionnaire as well. And lastly, you guys were also consulted in a letter of commitment that we drafted. It's a letter that the highest person in the non-business participant organization must sign in order to become a participant. You also provided feedback on that. The second consultation was done with non-business stakeholder groups, and for them we asked them what are their suggested reporting requirements. So for example, we have our labor groups. So we went to some representatives of labor unions and we told them, please give us your suggestions on what labor unions should be reporting on when they are participants in the Global Compact. They provided the feedback. The same thing was done with NGO groups, with business associations, with cities, with academics, etc., with each one of the different non-business groups that we have. And lastly, our Global Compact office, different teams in our office, gave input on the draft of the policy. I'm going to pause here for a minute and pass it to Gordana. Do we have any questions up to this point, Gordana?
No questions.
Perfect, thank you. So remember, webinar participants, if you have any question, just type it down and we'll be happy to address it. Okay, so let's move on. What we have seen so far is the process, what it is, what has happened, and now we're going to see what are the objectives of the policy. So COE, forgive me, I missed this little explanation before. As you know, our business participants, our companies, do a COP, Communication on Progress. And as I said, the board discussion was companies report on how they implement and integrate the principles. That's why it's communication on progress. Since non-business participants are going to report on a different topic, they are going to report on how they engage with the Global Compact. Their policy is called not communication on progress, but communication on engagement, COE. That's where the title of the policy comes from. The objectives are to, first of all, address the concerns raised by local networks on the topics that I mentioned before, on limited information, lack of clear expectations from this group, and the absence of a reporting requirement. Secondly, the objective of the policy is then to develop clear requirements for them, avoid the misuse of the non-business category, what I explained before, organizations that join as non-businesses hoping to get out of the requirement of reporting. And then, of course, maximize the potential of non-business participation in the initiative. As you guys, local networks, pointed out, this is a very important group for us, for our mission, and we need to make sure we are taking advantage of what they can offer and what they want to do. Very important to keep in mind at this point is the Global Compact mandate, meaning our reason for existing in this world, remains to engage with businesses primarily. When we were created at the General Assembly here across the street from where I'm sitting, we received the mandate from the governments that approved our creation of engaging businesses into sustainability practices. That mandate is not changing. We are just doing this policy as something that we believe will enhance our initiative, but our main focus, our efforts, our resources will still be targeted primarily to working with businesses. Secondly, the COE policy will only affect non-business participants. So the COE, the policy that we're studying today, it won't affect anybody else other than non-business participants in the initiative. This includes participants that exist today, as well as participants that will be joining in the future. Non-businesses are expected to align their practices with the 10 principles, but they are only required to report on their engagement. This is exactly what I was talking about the debate at the board level. We do expect them to incorporate the principles, and you will see that in the draft of the policy, but they will only be required to report on their engagement. And lastly, the dialogue facilitation that we offer will remain to be applicable to business participants only. So, for example, if an NGO submits a report as COE, and then we hear from a stakeholder from that NGO, and they say, look, there's a problem with this report, the NGO is not being accurate, they are lying, let's say. If it were a company, we would immediately start a dialogue facilitation process. But here, since it's an NGO, we are not going to do that. Non-business participants will not have this dialogue facilitation process. It remains only for business participants. Okay, Gordana, any questions so far?
Yeah, and I actually do have a question. And the question is, how will this new policy affect companies that are currently listed as non-businesses and haven't reported for a couple of years?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a very, very interesting question. There are a couple options that we have with this group. First of all, it depends. It is always the decision of this company to remain listed as a business or as a non-business. It is their decision. We, as we always say in our training materials and everywhere, we are not the police. We cannot go after them and say, hey, you are lying. You're saying you are a non-business when you are really a non-business. That is not our role. We can point that out to them. We can certainly contact them, call them and say, look, you are classified as this and that. We suggest you change your classification. If they decide to continue to be labeled as non-businesses, it's their responsibility. It is their own image, their own reputation, the one that is at stake, because all stakeholders are noticing that this company is doing so. Now, let's suppose we contact them, we tell them we suggest you should be labeled as a company, they refuse and they want to remain as non-business. Then the whole process of a non-business participant will apply to them. We will go over that in a minute, and I will come back to this question when we explain what is going to be the process for non-business participants. Any other questions, Gordana, before we move on to the next section?
Yes, we have another question. Is the COE also for academic institutions?
Okay. Good question. Yes, it is also for academic institutions. Academic institutions are listed under our classification as non-business participants. Now, this is an area of intense debate because we hear constantly from stakeholders, from universities, from themselves saying, look, we are a business. In many cases, they look for profit. It's not even that they are non-profits. Some of them are for profit. So how come the Global Compact classifies academic institutions as non-business participants? And the whole idea behind it is that the activities that they conduct as academics in terms of research, of teaching, of spreading information is valuable to us in itself. Not so much how they run their building, let's say. Not so much how much energy they save in their building. In that specific case, for us, is more valuable how they can support us in our mission. That is why we keep them as a non-business participants. Now, when we did all our consultation processes, the academic community, of course, they were one of the consulted ones, and their feedback was very lengthy and extensive. We consulted participants that are academic institutions as well as the prime group. You are aware we have an initiative within the Global Compact that is called PRIME, is for institutions in management education. Their feedback was with very specific areas where where academic institutions must report on. Academic institutions is one of the groups where they will be encouraged and strongly encouraged to report on their own implementation of the 10 principles. So on top of reporting on how they engage with the Global Compact, their stakeholders said the policy should strongly encourage academic institutions to also report on the implementation of the 10 principles. So that's one specific group right there. Okay, so let me move on to the next question, to the next section, and if there are any more questions, please, as you have been doing, type them down and we will address. Now let's see what is the COE policy. What does it say? As I mentioned before, it is called draft, but it doesn't mean that is under construction. It's final. The language is final, and we are not changing language at this moment. I don't like it when I'm sorry, when I program these presentations to appear little by little, it drives me nuts. Okay, so the COE policy was created in a way that it mirrors the COP. It's just that we tailored each one of the elements to the specific case of non-business participants. So what you have here on the left-hand side of the screen is the COP policy in a nutshell, the COP requirements in a nutshell. We require a statement, description, and measurement of outcomes. On the right-hand side of the screen, you have the COE content requirements. So see how they are parallel. The first requirement is a statement of continued support by CEO. For non-businesses is a statement of continued support by chief executive or equivalent. You know, in non-businesses, they don't necessarily have a CEO. That's why we modified the language. But the requirement is the same. The second requirement is a description of actions in all issue areas. They have to report in every single issue area. Now, non-business participants here is a little bit different. They do have to include a description of actions, but not in all of the suggested activities, but in at least one of the suggested activities according to each organization type. Each organization type has different suggested activities. The activities are not listed in the text of the policy. The activities are those listed in our website. Those have been reviewed. The website is still due to be updated with the latest responses. But there is where each type of organization will see what are their suggested activities. And lastly, the COP requires companies to disclose a measurement of outcomes, and the COE mirrors exactly the same requirement. Disclose a measurement of outcomes for non-business participants. Let's see. As you know, the COP has different levels. We have our differentiation program where you have GC Active, GC Advanced, GC Learner. That is not going to apply to non-business participants. They report or not report, and that is it. Either the report is complete or the report is incomplete. It will show in our public database, it will show this COE was complete or incomplete, but it will not show any levels. We don't have differentiation levels for them. This slide shows us in parallel different aspects, not only the content of the report, but different aspects of the COP policy as compared to the COE policy. So in terms of submission, how the two compare. Let's go one at a time. We've put little arrows in those that are identical, where nothing has changed from the COP to the COE. There are no arrows when there is a difference. So let's start. COP submission, as you all know, is an annual requirement. The COE submission is different. There was some debate, and this point was controversial. At the board level, in the consultations, etc. One group of people said it has to be annual, otherwise what's the point of this? If it's not annual, strict as we are with companies, then what's the point of this? The other group of people, including the non-business stakeholder groups that we consulted, were saying it is very high standard for the majority of non-business participants to report every year. Some of these organizations, they barely have the resources to make it through the year, to make it through their own internal activities, and yet we are expecting them to report every year. It's too much. This second position won the debate. So the requirement ended up being every 2 years. Now the policy includes language saying they are encouraged but not required to report annually. So if they want voluntarily to do so, perfect, they are welcome, but the requirement is every 2 years. The COP policy says that the first COP is due 1 year after the company has joined the Global Compact. That is following on the annual requirement. The COE policy, on the other hand, says that the first COE is due 2 years after joining, and that is exactly for coherence with the every 2 years requirement. Now this is exactly the same. COP has to be submitted online. If it's not submitted online, then it basically doesn't count. COE is going to be exactly the same. The COP policy says that the self-assessment determines the level. So as you all know, companies, when they submit a COP, they have to go through a questionnaire. Depending on the questions they answer, yes or no, etc., their COP is classified in one of our levels. As we saw before, there are no levels with the COE policy. It's either they reported or not reported, complete or not complete. So there is a self-assessment that will help us to determine if that COE included the minimum requirements, but there will be no levels. It will say this COE includes all the requirements, or this COE does not include all the requirements. The PDF is required in both COP and COE. this is also identical. The first deadline missed, or if actually is any deadline missed, will turn that company into non-communicating. So the deadline, the report was due today, the company didn't submit the report, they turn into non-communicating that very same day. Automatically our system changes them to non-communicating. Exactly the same will happen with the COE. At the moment they miss their deadline, the 2 years deadline, again, is a 2-year requirement, so they miss the 2-year deadline, they become non-communicating. In the COP policy, companies that have been non-communicating for 1 year, they will be expelled. For non-business participants, it remains exactly the same. Here, it was different from the 2 years. The non-communicating category is for 1 year for both. Non-business participants can be non-communicating only for 1 year before they are expelled. If they miss that year, then they will be expelled. And lastly, the deadline modification methods that we offer to companies, as you all know, that is a grace period or an adjustment request. It applies exactly the same for non-business participants. Okay, Gordana, do we have any questions so far?
Yes, we have a question regarding the translation of the COE policy in different languages. And similar to that, whether this presentation will be translated into Spanish.
Okay, great. Very good questions, both. The first one, if the language of the COE, the same thing applies as with COPs. The COP, as you guys remember, we expect the COP to be in the language of the main stakeholder group. So if a company operates in Mexico, they have their employees based in Mexico and they sell products to Mexican consumers, then that COP is probably better to be done initially in Spanish because their employees, their customers, their suppliers are in a Spanish-speaking country. For the COE, it's the same. It's the language of the stakeholders of the company. There are two groups. Let me explain this better. There are two groups of stakeholders here when we talk about non-businesses. One is the stakeholders of the NGO. Let's suppose it's an NGO who, it's a British NGO, so they are located in London, but they operate in Latin America, keeping track of the respect of human rights. So the stakeholders of this organization are probably going to be located in the UK, London, other academics, other NGOs who are interested in the work of this NGO. But since this NGO tracks human rights in Latin America by companies located in Latin America, the stakeholders of that company are probably to be Spanish speaking. So in that case, the COE will be encouraged to be in Spanish because we want the stakeholders affected by the company's actions to be able to understand what has this organization been doing with that company. Now, we, of course, as with the COP, we encourage this NGO to publish also the report in English because they have stakeholders in the UK and probably their stakeholders will be interested in knowing what's going on with the organization. So I hope that's clear. I know it's a little confusing. I hope it's clear. And secondly, if this presentation will be translated, that is something where we would strongly appreciate, and we actually ask for the help of the local networks. It's not only in Spanish, we have the same case with French, with Japanese, Chinese, Korean. If you guys, local networks, have any capacity of helping us translating this presentation, it will be great. We internally have, here at the Global Compact Office, we have limited resources, and we are trying to scratch from wherever we can. So if you can support us in that way, it will be great. Okay, anything else, Gordana, before we move on?
And I just wanted to apologize for not being clear with the earlier question. The question was actually whether the actual COE policy will be available in other languages.
Oh, okay, perfect. That's okay, great. But we addressed two questions because I think the other question was about to come up too. And for the COE policy, yes, it will be translated in the UN languages. That is something that we have already programmed for, so that resources have been allocated to that. UN languages, and of course it will. Usually these translations take time. We are working, we're doing our best to have the different languages ready at the moment of launching the policy. However, you already might be familiar of how our translations work. Sometimes they take a little longer, but we will be translating it in UN languages. Okay. Anything else before we move on?
Yes. One other question. When will the non-business participants have to submit the COE if they have joined the Global Compact more than 2 years ago? So that
okay. Great question. I'm going to put it on hold because the next section of the presentation explains that very clearly. So give me 30 seconds. Any other question before we move on to the next section?
I think the question will be addressed because it's similar to the one previously. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So let me go to the next section, and we will be addressing these questions that are coming up. Okay, this is just, let's not take time on these. We have been setting our system. You know how the submission has to be done online. When companies go and submit their COP, they see a questionnaire. So we have been mirroring that, and we have been programming our system. So non-business participants, when they submit their COE, they will see also the questionnaire. This is a picture of what we are working on right now. This is still in the works. Our IT people have been really helpful working on it, but it's still in process. I just wanted you to see how it's going to look like, more or less. And now, what are the next steps? And here is where these questions come in. What happens with the ones that exist already? What happens with when will they have to start reporting? So I have another timeline here, and it will show you clearly what is going to happen. May 2013. So let me start by the end. I think here is going to be easier. 31 October this year, Halloween, when everyone is wearing their costumes, we will be implementing the policy. That day is when the policy will be enforced. As you can see, we're starting pretty early in our timeline. We are May, so quite a few months before the enforcement, and we wanted to start this timeline here of implementation with this webinar for local networks. For us, it's very important that you guys have this information early enough so you start preparing yourselves to be able to understand, ask questions if you have any questions, and prepare yourselves for the time when October comes and the questions by the actual participants start coming in. However, please keep in mind, this point is very, very, very important. Please keep in mind that we have designed a very strategic and very well thought communication strategy to communicate to non-business participants this new requirement. They don't know about it already, and it is on purpose. They don't know because we have planned it that way. We have created this process that I'm going to explain in a minute to release the information, to prepare them to what is coming up. And that communication strategy starts in September. So if between May and September, let's say your local network starts communicating this policy without following our strategy, you will find yourselves in a very difficult position because we don't have yet the strategy in place to support these non-business participants. So let me explain to you exactly what is this strategy, and you will see what I'm trying to explain. So in September, early September, full 2 months before the moment of enforcement, non-business participants will be informed. The policy will be released. There's going to be a big press release. There's going to be an announcement in our bulletin. There's going to be communications going out to our existing non-business participants, so they know something is coming up. When they know about that, we envision that some of them, of course, will get nervous. Like, what is this? What is it that I have to do? And if I don't do it, am I going to get expelled? What's going to happen? So we are going to channel all those questions that will come up through a series of webinars that will take place throughout late September and early October. So in our communications, the written ones that I'm talking about via the bulletin, the press releases, etc., we will tell our non-business participants, you are welcome to attend our webinars. You will be receiving materials, information materials. So please register to these webinars to learn more about what is going to be required from you. It is going to be soon enough. They are going to be informed in September. So it's only going to be a few weeks until the first webinar starts in late September, and then throughout October we have webinars. And as you know, the webinars come together with presentations, materials, recordings, what have you. And then after the webinar series ends in October, then October 31st, it is enforced. What it means that is enforced, it is that if any non-business participant joins the initiative on October 31st or after October 31st, let's say they come in November 5th of 2013, they are required to report 2 years after that. They are required to send their first COE 2 years after joining. That's for new participants, is the easy case. What happens to existing participants, which is the question we had before? So existing participants, since they were informed since September, then trained about it in October, and then the policy was enforced on October 31st, existing participants at the moment of October 31st will have 2 years starting in October 31st to submit their first COE. So these people have until October 31st, Halloween Day again, of 2015 to send their first COE. We thought it was also a lengthy discussion internally and with board members, etc. And we thought it's fair enough to give them enough time to prepare their COE. They have 2 years. 2 years is plenty of time. So it was an agreement that is enough time to let them do that. So what I was trying to tell you guys at the very beginning, let me recap what I was trying to say is, as you can see, we have this whole strategy starting in September, trying to time everything. This was drafted with communications experts, with consultants, etc. And it was determined that announcing in September, training later September and October as well, would put us in a good position to have the capacity to train the non-business participants into the new requirement and to be able to implement it in October 31st. Now, if you at the local level or any person starting in May releases this requirement, it is probably going to create some nervousness among the non-business participants. They're going to be, oh, and what is this? What's going to happen? I'm nervous. Am I going to be expelled? Then we can tell them, oh, guys, wait until October, because they are going to be nervous. So we prefer to keep it to us internally with our local networks, with our office, for the time being, and in September, our communication strategy kicks in. Let me see, do we have any other questions so far, Gordana?
Yes. Can local networks also host a webinar on COE policy in their language?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you very much for the local network who posed this question. You are more than welcome. We actually beg you to do so. We will provide you the presentation in a format that you can edit, so you can do it in your own language. You will be receiving the recording, so if you need reminders, etc., you can always listen to it and be aware of it. The only thing is that we do ask you to wait and do it until our communication strategy has kicked in. That means you probably should be doing this around October, sometime in October. So yes, you are welcome. We really appreciate you taking the initiative of doing it locally at the, oops, what happened here? Sorry, I don't know why my computer did that. So we encourage and we appreciate the effort, but aligned with our communication strategy, therefore in October would be the perfect time to do that. Any other question?
No other questions.
Okay, perfect. So let's move on. So what are the next steps? The COE policy will enter into effect on October 31st. Halloween this year, I don't think we will forget because of the Halloween reference. So when it is ready, it will be in October. You're welcome to download the final text of the COE policy. It will be released in October. Then share what you learn in this webinar with your colleagues, again, in your network. This is to prepare for questions that might arise from non-business participants. But again, share the information for now only with your colleagues to avoid panicking unnecessarily our non-business participants. Promote and attend our webinars targeted for the non-business community that will happen in October, so we will let you know through your local network update. So please keep a close eye on the update, and we will let you know when those webinars are coming up, and you can spread the word among your non-business participants. And then lastly, we encourage you to support your non-business participants in submitting their COE, and of course encouraging them to do so. If they don't, they will be expelled. So it's important that they are aware of the importance of this requirement. And that is it from our end so far. Here are our contact information. My name is Ana Blanco. You can feel free to contact me, Sarah Boswick, Gordana, who has been with me on the line as well. We are all more than happy to address your questions, so feel free to contact us. Let's see, do we have any questions before we leave, Gordana?
No other questions, Anna.
Perfect. So I want to thank you all for your participation. I hope it was clear. And as I said, you will be receiving the recording of this webinar later in the day. Give us a few hours because the recording download takes some time. So we will do it throughout the day and you will be receiving it soon. I hope it was helpful and thank you very much. And thank you, Gordana.
You were